So I think traditionally when people think about environmental education or environmental literacy, they go right to things like endangered species and wilderness protection, and some of the more traditional issues that have been prominent in the mainstream environmental movement. And when we're talking about environmental justice, then I think a whole additional set of issues get brought into the conversation, not to the exclusion of those other really important issues, but things like sea level rise and the impact that that will have and is already having on coastal communities. The pandemic is an environmental justice issue, housing insecurity, um, fires and wildfire that's the result of climate change, food insecurity, toxics in communities, um, fisheries issues, not including the impact of depleted fisheries on small local fisheries around the world and throughout the coastline. Um, and I think historically, even in California here, um, every kid learns about the California gold rush when they're in 4th or 5th grade, but they don't necessarily learn about the hydraulic mining that stripped away the Sierra Nevada mountains, and destroyed the landscape that Native people and indigenous people were living on. And they don't necessarily learn about the genocide that went along with the gold rush of removing Native people from their land. And those are all environmental issues, and they're all issues of environmental justice. I think there are at least two aspects of addressing the issue of ensuring that communities of color and low-income communities and vulnerable populations have access to environmental experiences that lead to environmental literacy. So one aspect is ensuring access. And that really, when it comes down to it, revolves around money. It has to do with program fees and transportation and making experiences and curriculum available to kids and communities that can't afford to pay for it themselves. So there's just a very basic access issue that that our country has not done a very good job of addressing. The other aspect, which I think is often overlooked and is at least as important, is addressing the relevance of those experiences and activities to the communities that they're intended for. And so this has to do with the conversation that we just had about what the issues are and what are the topics that are included in the study of the environment. And so we've been often the way that curriculum and programs are designed in the environmental ed space are that these programs and experiences are designed for the mainstream audience. And in the United States, mainstream still means white and middle to upper middle class. And once we have these experiences that are custom designed for a white audience, then occasionally people think about, okay, how do those need to be modified or adapted to address the needs and concerns of communities of color and lower income communities? And we're starting to design from exactly the opposite perspective. And we refer to this as designing at the margins. and thinking first, initially, right at the beginning of the program, curriculum, experience, design phase, who is least likely to have access to this experience and benefit from it? Who's most marginalized from this experience? And we're going to design the experience with and for that community first, not last. So we address the community and their needs and their interests right immediately, and then adapt the other way. Like, what would we have to do for this to be relevant for the more mainstream audience? And often what we see is that the approaches and the issues and the contexts that are relevant to the most marginalized communities are also very relevant to less marginalized communities, although the opposite is not always true. I would say that that just in the last 3 to 5 years, there has been a growing awareness of the issues related to environmental justice and the historical racism that has been part of the environmental movement in the United States. So I think there's been a growing awareness, maybe even an obsession in the environmental community with trying to figure out how to overcome those conditions. And I think we're just at the very beginning of establishing the kind of partnerships that I've been talking about, considering approaches like designing at the margins, considering environmental justice issues to be part of the environmental literacy canon. So I think we're making progress, but we're not at the point of widespread understanding of new practices yet.